Thank you very much. And once again, welcome to this event. We have an agenda that we'll be going through today. We want to spend just 30 minutes on that and then open up the space for Corina and our other colleagues. But we are very happy to share, to share energetically with you what we've been doing. This webinar is being recorded so that we can then share it with others who have not been able to connect now. The objective for this event is to present our systematization document for this action and also to introduce some proposals for those that want to get involved, for anyone that wants to volunteer for this, and we have some tools to help you do that. Please, let's go to the next screen. So, just the context, from May 5th to the 9th, we were in Banahachel. More than 140, I think it was 154 people from 13 countries across the Americas came together to confront what's happening at a global level, the attack on democracy, a very important issue. And we are not talking about a defense of liberal democracies. We wanted a plural space so we could consider democracy in the broadest sense, and to talk about the attacks that are being waged against different areas and different democratic spaces here in our region, but as well as throughout the world. Next slide, please. So after gathering, we gave ourselves certain goals. We wanted to generate spaces to deliberate and reflect on the regional political context and establish road paths to counter this, to analyze the challenges that democracies are facing throughout the hemisphere, and to get to know citizen and community experiences that are playing out throughout the continent. So these are ambitious goals that we put to ourselves. And we were able to come together from different spaces, different actors, activists, journalists, researchers, and people active in social movements to discuss these different topics. It was a very rich discussion. It was a success. But after these favorable gatherings, well, we need to find ways to continue the work. And so that's why we are presenting this now. So what is the systematization document? It took us a while to put this together because we had so much information to organize. And I'd like to pass the microphone to Ana Paula to share this part. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to see everyone. We will cover this very briefly because it's just an initial part of our work. It's something that came out from our very fruitful 3-day event. The first thing to say is that beyond this document, there are a series of resources that we have put together, and we'll be talking about those today. You can access those through the QR code. You'll also get that in your emails. So what is the systematization document? It's an attempt, it was a complex project to bring together, and being very careful, we wanted to create a synthesis of all of the information that was compiled throughout the 3-day event, and we wanted to have a user-friendly document for you. We hope we've achieved these goals to make you aware of what was discussed in those 3 days, and then to have a document that makes that all of that easily accessible. So what does it contain? If you have not yet had access to it, it's a synthesis of the expression walls, these these activities where we expressed the different questions and the different topics throughout the gathering. The summaries of each day's panels are also included, and there's also links to the panels in English and Spanish for you to utilize, to refresh your memories, and to share with others in the different organizations and communities where you are active or with whom you're active. And we're hoping that it will be an enriching document. It's an organization also of the group discussions that were a central part of the 3-day event. So we won't spend too much time on the document, but rather focus on the proposals for the future. Next slide, please. So on the one hand, we have our main challenges, the main challenges to democracies, and we're talking about democracies in plural. And if you'll remember, we first of all scrutinized the concept of democracy. We looked at the model of democracy and neoliberal democracies. In particular, that's where we started. Then also the state democracies, where nations are confronting criminalization and violence and other social problems. Also, challenges with information and exchanging of knowledge that contribute to undemocratic narratives and discourses. We responded to the lack of spaces to access trustworthy and verifiable information. We also engage the environment of fear that is out there around so many of the cases. Also, the social reproduction of inequality, ethnocentrism, sexism, patriarchy, and so on. And we also talked about internal challenges that social movements are experiencing. And when we designed the event, we wanted to take a look outwards, but also look inwards. And so in the document, you will find the things that were mentioned about cooperation, the lack of clear goals, and also the reproduction within organizations of those very same inequalities that we are challenging. So those are the main points that we gathered around the question of the main challenges to democracies. Then, in the second part of the event, the question is, what are we going to do about it? And what are we doing now? What strategies are we activating? So this wasn't just about what we want to do, but what we are doing now, because that contributed to the exchange of information. In this in-person gathering, we wanted to create a space of trust for us to be able to exchange information about what we're doing as activists, individually, in our collectives, to confront the challenges. And in the document, we also put the main outputs of our work. We talked about the search for diversity and democratic alternatives. We talked about alternatives for democracy, alternatives for thinking about democracy. We brought together experiences that are coming out of indigenous peoples in our communities. And we also identified the parameters for actions that exist within liberal democracies in which we live. We also identified networks, thinking about creating alliances and networks that integrate global strategies with local actions. This comes out of our concern for exchange, but we wanted to connect everything to our lived realities. We wanted to think about how we can activate strategies that allow us to sustain our struggles and also strategies for protection for human rights defenders and activists that allow us to or that allows us to keep in mind important strategies and pillars for our movements like collective action and such. We also identified the need to develop leadership, to expand capacities, to be able to confront corruption, egocentrism, and also barriers in communications, thinking about alternatives to exchange discourses and narratives. Communications, we thought, was a great challenge, and we wanted to think about how we can effectively share relevant information amongst all of the noise that's out there. And we also talked about including the younger generations, young people, and youths. This is a critical piece. It came up in different ways, but it's something that was an issue or a concern that was always being expressed throughout the event. So, and we were always coming back to the social movements, those things that we see as challenges. We can also think about them in relation to strategies that we use in the future to develop strategic visions with clarity, internal communications, so that we can develop our collective movements. We emphasize the collective dimension, thinking about our everyday practices, our lived experience, because we can't go out and make demands that don't correspond to the way that we are living. And the sixth element, we talked about protecting the environment from extractive capitalism, allied with which is allied with authoritarian regimes. We talked about the challenges of transnational corporations that are presented by corporate organizations. And when it comes to defending democracy, we need to connect that to the protection of the planet and the protection of life. So these were the main topics that we identified, and I invite all of you to read this document in greater detail and share with us your observations, your reactions. And so we wanted to summarize what happened in the previous event, but we also want to build off of that now and talk about what we're going to do. And so we are going to present some actions, some future proposals for the future. And so I'll pass the microphone back to my colleague. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ana Paula. Y pues efectivamente,
Thank you, Ana Paula.
a nosotros los encuentros como tal nos parecen
So
un
these
reto porque
gatherings
además de
are
un
in
espacio
themselves
de
a challenge
convivencia,
because
el reto
more than
es
just having a good
hacer que esto sea
experience,
más
uh,
real,
a,
¿verdad?
a,
Más
a nice time, we want to actually
que deriven de ahí procesos.
generate
Y si bien hemos
processes.
escuchado y
We
hemos
want
visto
concrete
que
things
hay
to come
algunos
out of these
esfuerzos
gatherings.
multilaterales,
And we
multilaterales,
understand
diferentes
that there
organizaciones
are
internacionales
independent
diversas
processes,
que nos gustaría
bilateral
compartir con ustedes el día de hoy.
initiatives, and
Esta
we wanted to
presentación y
share
algunas propuestas
how
para
we've
nuestro
organized
crecimiento
all of that,
colectivo
brought it here
y una apuesta
for
colectiva,
you.
¿verdad? Que no es nuestra, que no la
And we want
representamos
to
solamente
underscore the fact that
o
this
no
is a
representa
collective
nosotros,
effort. It doesn't
es algo de
represent
lo que
just
nosotros
what we've proposed,
nos
but
vamos
what was proposed throughout the
adueñar
event.
o a controlar o
We
a dirigir,
don't
sino
want
que es un
to
espacio
have
que nos
anyone
va a
think that
permitir
we are
la
controlling this
sistematización y el
process or
experimentar
development, that we are
en medio
appropriating
de
anything.
continuar, ¿verdad?
It's all
Continuar
about just taking
y
stock and
en
understanding
este
how best to
caso
move
invitamos a
forward.
que sea un
And
espacio
so
colectivo y
we
voluntario.
want this to be a collective space that is open to everyone's participation. Hopefully, all of us here can contribute to it, particularly since this is a context that for our organizations and for our societies, well, many times we're watching what is being presented in the media about what's happening in the United States. And so many times we don't look at what's happening in our own communities and with ourselves. We were just talking about, or with Rebechi, he always is makes himself available to talk about this and the value of keeping ourselves strategically connected. And so we've invited him to share with us today, uh, keeping in mind that he expresses this, or he gives voice to this so eloquently and so powerfully. He has some very interesting reflections. So, Raul, please go ahead. We give you the microphone.
Buenas tardes a todos y todas.
Raul Sibechi. Good afternoon to everyone.
Bien, solo decirles que les agradezco mucho la
I wanted
invitación
to, first of all,
y
thank
el
you for this
realizar este
invitation,
esfuerzo para
being part
conectarnos
of
de
this
manera muy
effort
vínculo.
which brings us together
A mí me parecen dos cosas para ser
is
concreto y breve
very
sobre esto.
valuable. There's two
Me
things that
parece
I
que
want
es
to mention
importante
here.
y
I think it's
fundamental
important and
mantener el
fundamental
vínculo.
to
Me parece que es
establish
importante y
connections,
fundamental
and it's important and
seguir en
fundamental
contacto personas
to
que estamos en diferentes países,
continue to stay
diferentes
in touch
regiones,
across the
que
regions, across
tenemos, que pertenecemos
countries,
a un tipo de
those of
colectivos
us
distintos,
that are
indígenas,
members of
cívicos,
different
rurales,
collectives, whether
urbanos,
they're rural, urban, indigenous,
colectivos académicos.
different
Es
types
importante que esa
of
diversidad entre
groupings and
nosotros
communities,
y
we
se
need to
vincule.
have that diversity
El
be a
problema
part
aquí
of these
surge,
processes.
y
The
un poco
problem
recién
occurs,
Alonso lo planteaba,
however, and Alonso
cómo
mentioned this,
nos
Minor
conectamos, de qué
Alonso,
manera.
is the
Y
question is,
aquí es donde
how do we do
empezamos por
this?
ahí
How
una
do we come
pregunta,
together and connect with
y es
each
la
other?
siguiente.
And
Tradicionalmente, los movimientos sociales, los
traditionally,
movimientos emancipatorios,
social movements,
hemos
liberation
diferenciado
movements,
en
we
un
have
tipo de organización que
differentiated
podríamos llamar de
ourselves
carácter
by
sindical,
being
o sea,
in
porque han sido
unions
organizaciones
or
que
organizations
siempre
that
han
have
estado del movimiento
a
popular en pie. Y son
horizontal
organizaciones, por decirlo de
nature.
algún modo,
And these organizations,
jerárquicas que tienen una estructura y una
hierarchical
burocracia, por decirlo de algún
organizations
modo,
that
bien
have
estructurada
bureaucracy,
que
very well
garantiza
established
una
structures
continuidad
that this
en su
allows for
existencia,
continuity for
pero eso genera otros
organizations,
problemas,
but
¿verdad? Y que en la
these
historia
features also
son
create
muchos los casos que
problems.
se han
And
visto
throughout
de
history, we have
problemas
many
que ha
cases
generado ese
of
tipo de
problems that are
estructura
generated
y que
by
esa
this type of
coordinación
organizational structure
escapa
and
de un
organizational
aparato
coordination,
burocrático
which relies on
siempre teniendo
bureaucracy
intereses
and
propios,
ultimately ends up
siempre
serving its own
en relación
interests,
a
not
lo que quiere
necessarily
obtener o a lo que las bases de ese
the
movimiento
principal interest
necesitan.
of the movement or the cause that they
Uno
are
de los
espousing
problemas,
or
aparte de tener
supporting.
intereses propios,
Another problem
es que
beyond the serving of
las
self-interest,
burocracias piensan por sí mismas, como decimos
bureaucracies have a
nosotros
mind of their
siempre,
own,
en el sentido de que
as
tienen una
scholars
cultura
have noted.
política, una cultura organizativa
They
que
develop
les lleva
a
a
internal culture, a
determinadas
bureaucratic
reacciones
culture
que
that
con el
makes
tiempo,
them
y aquí
respond
les
or
quiero
operate
aclarar y
according to
explicar un
specific
poco,
logics,
¿verdad?
including
Las
patriarchal
jerarquías,
logics,
la pirámide, esa jerarquía
hierarchy, these
profundamente patriarcal y
pyramids,
colonial.
power,
Con el correr del
respond
tiempo,
to
los
uh,
movimientos más
hierarchical power
recientes,
structures and
mujeres,
colonial
indígenas,
mindsets.
movimientos juveniles del
Of
más
course,
diverso
then
tipo,
there are
han
diverse movements,
buscado
indigenous
formas de
movements,
organización más
student
flexibles
movements that
y
show
más
us more
flexibles,
flexible modes of organizing
algunas veces estables, pero
or of being in an
que
organization.
no
Many
construyen
times they
burocracia.
are stable and
Esto lo menciono por
they
esta idea
don't produce
de
bureaucracy.
pensar
And I
cómo vamos a
mention this
coordinar,
because we have to think about how
cómo
we're going
vamos a
to
establecer los
coordinate
vínculos.
ourselves
Pero a su
internally,
vez
how we're going to
sucede
establish
algo
connections
cuando la
amongst
coordinación,
ourselves.
que en principio
And
es
something
horizontal y es
happens
estable,
when
La
we
cultura política
are
aprendida,
engaged in coordination in an
basada
organization.
en lo
This political
patriarcal,
culture, which
se
responds to
reproduce
patriarchy and
ante las
hierarchy,
culturas
then
que
is
no tienen
reproduced
capacidad de
internally.
reproducir esa cultura. ¿Por qué? Bueno, porque la cultura es algo muy complejo,
Culture is a
muy
very complex
invisible, muy
thing.
difícil de
It's
manejar, y las
difficult to
continuidades en la
respond to it, and
cultura social,
the
cultura
different kinds
religiosa,
of
cultura
cultures,
política,
political culture, religious
entonces,
culture,
las continuidades en las culturas son muy potentes y son muy
our
resistentes
organizations
a la
are
modificación.
informed by these
De manera
logics,
que la
and it's very
cultura
difficult to modify those
cambia
types of
en
logics or
tiempos
cultures.
glaciales, ¿verdad? O sea, lo que sería
It's
una
been
era
said that
glacial
these
para que una
cultural
cultura cambie. Nosotros
that
estamos
culture
acostumbrados
changes
a ver las
at
novedades en la
pace
cultura,
of
pero no las
glaciers.
continuidades.
So,
Entonces, como ustedes planteaban hoy, y
as
tiene
had been
toda la
previously
razón,
mentioned, and
y creo que es
Carlos
muy
was talking about
importante
this recently, and it's very
concebir
important,
esto que
we
tenemos
need
como un
to
espacio,
conceive
porque ahora se han
this
creado
as a
espacios,
space. And
los
there are
movimientos
spaces
feministas
out
crean
there
estos
that have
espacios
been
de
created by
encuentro
the
y luego
feminist
cada movimiento
movements.
vuelve a lo suyo.
Um,
Recién
there's
el zapatismo hace
different
unos
modes that then
días
come, or
hizo durante 2 semanas un espacio de encuentro en donde hubieron
different
más de
next
300
organizations,
compañeros
and
del
then there's a
movimiento
nexus
que se
that then
expresaron y
function
así, el mundo
independently
no
and then come back
necesariamente
together.
tiene que
And we see
darse de
this
encuentro,
throughout the world, the way
sino
that
que
different
no siempre
entities
es
and
muy
actors
permanente, sino
gather.
cada
And
tiempo se
oftentimes these are
repite,
not
¿verdad? En otros lugares,
permanent
cambiando.
structures or
Y
organization
entonces todo
systems,
espacio de
but they
encuentro
may
me parece
repeat
que es de una riqueza
their
que tenemos que
they
pensar.
engage in modalities
Creo que
that
esto que se
repeat.
está
And so it's
buscando
good to think through this,
dialoga más con la
because
idea de
what we're looking
espacio
for,
que con la
I
idea de
think,
aparato
resonates
o de
more with
estructura
spaces, the idea of spaces,
necesariamente
rather than
burocrática.
a formal
Entonces,
apparatus
los
or a
espacios,
bureaucratic
primero,
structure. And so spaces,
no son permanentes,
spaces
están
like this, they're not
durante
permanent. When we were in
varios
Panajachel,
días, pero
it
luego,
was
cada uno a lo
several days
suyo.
that we were there, but each person was
Podemos
able to
abrir otro
focus on
espacio,
their own
cerrar
issue.
otros espacios por
We
X
decided to
días.
open another
Pero lo
space for a
interesante
set
aquí
amount of
es que
time.
la información que
And
fluye,
what was interesting is that the
las personas que
information
participaron o
was
incluso
able
las
to
que no
flow and be
participaron,
transmitted
pueden estar en
even
condiciones de
among people that weren't there in person.
generar un encuentro con otro y aunque no
We
vayan
were
todas las
able
personas,
to
como se hace una memoria, como se
establish
hace un juicio, como
connections,
se hace una síntesis de lo
and
sucedido, bueno, es
people
una
had were
materialización
able to write
de
about the
experiencias
experience, to
que se
synthesize
generan
ideas, and then
y
that
que
is
permiten
disseminated
que,
and
aunque no
brought
estemos
to
todos
everyone's
en el
awareness.
encuentro o en
And
el
even
sucesivo,
and that allows it, that makes it
exista
so that
una
when there is a
continuidad.
subsequent gathering,
Esto
even
es
if the same people
una
aren't present,
ganancia
you still have
porque
continuity.
la
And
continuidad de la
this
experiencia
is a great achievement because we have
podemos
continuity of
sostener
spaces without
requieren
having to
mucha
engage
energía
in
y
the
esfuerzo
problems that come
y
out
sostener un aparato
uh,
es
of all the
gran
energy and the
esfuerzo
cost. It doesn't
que
depend on
es
all that energy and
sustentado
costs
de quienes
that are
participan
required
a
by
nivel de la
hierarchical and more
energía
rigid
en la
structures and
energía que
bureaucracies.
fluye, a nivel de los
It's
costos
about
materiales
having things flow
de sostener el
despite
aparato y los
or
costos
perhaps
políticos de sostener
without having
una
to
microburocracia. A mí me
depend
gustaría
on these
recordarles
micro
que las grandes
bureaucracies and
revoluciones de la
rigid
historia de la
structures. I want to remind
civilización,
everyone that the great revolutions
estos
throughout history, like the French
microaparatos,
Revolution, these micro
estos
mechanisms,
aparatos se han
the
pulido,
internal
se
bureaucracies
han
of
mejorado
these
y termina
movements
siendo una nueva clase dominante.
ultimately transforms itself
Entonces,
after the revolution
si lo dejamos
into
así
the
como
new
como lo estamos
dominant
viendo,
structure
vamos
or
a
the
ganar que
status quo.
tenemos
And
una
so
construcción de
we need
articulación,
to
de
be
comunión
mindful
como clase
of our
puentes
articulation, how we come
que
together, of our
permitirán
communication, how we
cumplir el objetivo
build
de mantener
bridges
el contacto y la
so
fluidez
that they
de
are
la comunicación y
enable
de
communication
relaciones,
and that there's a
enfrentando los
fluidity
problemas
to
que se generan.
the
Yo creo que
processes
estamos ante una
and
oportunidad
that
muy interesante, muy
and bridges
necesaria
that don't lead
de
us to the
profundizarla
same problems that we see
y
historically
ante
come up
la
or come out
realidad
of
de que
movements.
si no
And we are
repetimos viejos
also
errores y no
mindful of the reality that if we don't repeat previous errors, then we have a future of possibility. We have a future where we can establish collective action mechanisms for exchange of information and knowledges to develop self-knowledge and self-awareness, which for me is a great opportunity. And I think it's something that we need to be very aware of.
Gracias, Raúl. Y
Thank you, Raul.
entonces,
Well, then I
ya que
think
hicimos todo el preámbulo,
that
vamos a
once
darle
we made this introduction, I will leave it to Joel to introduce some of the proposal suggestions of interchange that we have. Setting aside that this is just a proposal, we can adjust them, of course, but Joel will describe it further. Well, it is a pleasure seeing you here. Here we have some of the proposals that we've been working on. We are very excited of starting this project. So the first thing that we've been working on is a methodological proposal for follow-up workshops. So we know, we heard that around what we created in Panajachel, there have been some of the proposals who have been followed through. There have been some meetings or activities which makes us very happy because it's something that you did on yourselves. They did the coordination, their gatherings and meetings, and that's great. So perhaps further on this meeting, somebody would like to share your experiences, but we suggest an exercise that is divided in 3 different workshops that includes a little bit of the methodology, but that they were developing Panajachel and had other characteristics. It's thought of as for smaller groups or something you can do in your own organizations. And it is also something that can be broken down. So if you think that this is not applicable to you, if you think that you need something smaller, or if you want to add your own exercises or practices, that's also flexible. And we are open to new developments. If you want to have a dialogue with us, if you want us to help you in some way, we will be happy to help you. In the link, you have the organization and also a link for the methodology. So you can find all materials needed there. There's explanations, printouts, working materials, etc. So hopefully you can get excited about this and really put together these workshops. That would be great. Now, in the next follow-up proposals, we suggest having interviews. We know that on the 3rd day, that is the day where we were going to work these follow-up interviews, we had another event at the same time from an authoritative figure, actually, the current director of the university. So they were playing music, and that prevented us from working or doing what we wanted to. So we will organize meetings to go deeper on the challenges of democracies and also to open up to different ways or pathways to continue with the event. So I'm sure we will have communication with some of you to conduct this interview. The idea is to continue systematizing everything and to put together some sort of products or a document that might be helpful for us. We also have a proposal that is named The Hive. So this proposal is called the Hive. We realized, we saw that there was a lot of curiosity about methodologies, not only the ones that we were following on the event, but also the different methodologies that different organizations are using in their own countries. There's a lot of people that are doing things in different ways, and I think that we think that it's important for us to have an exchange of methodologies, to interchange different activities, so we can solve that specific question about how is it that we do things, how can we create dialogues between everybody, how can we understand each other, and also how can we make our activities more attractive. So perhaps the person attending the event is the person who handles all of this in the organizations, but sometimes they are the ones who create different methodologies in their organizations. This space is an open space, so we can invite them. And the idea is to have the different tools or methodologies that we have, the group analysis exercises or collaborative work, role-playing games, problem-solving techniques, and proposals for deliberative democracy. So the Hive will be that precise space so we can interchange different methodologies. We have also thought about these South-North meetings. I think this was very important for everybody to have a dialogue with our colleagues from the US mainly. There is a language barrier, which is important, and we want to face in some way. We know that there are things that are happening both in the northern and southern part of the continent. There are events, there are things that happen, political events that are important and that are happening, and it's very important for us to communicate with each other, to have a swift, agile communication in the process. Many things have happened actually since we met in Panajachel. We had the events of El Salvador, for example. Some colleagues had to leave their country. We also had the hurricane happening with the peoples in Guatemala. We had a communication that was pretty fast in creation, which is a good exercise. So there are many political movements, resistant movements, economical crisis, social and political crisis, human rights violations, repression, attacks on activists, analysis and coordination ahead of major electoral events or political events. So this is just a bet to have this conversation between the North and the South. And we also want to tackle this issue with the language. We will have translation, simultaneous translation, so everybody can understand each other. And of course, we also want to suggest having some sort of virtual reunion for November 2025. We think that is a great opportunity to gather, to meet constantly. So I think that the first one can be in November 2025. What are we going to do there? We want to talk about the systematization or whatever that have been happening in this South and North interchange. So I think that we need to do it in November, and we also want to see the progress and experiences in the various follow-up efforts. It might be the workshops or the processes that you are developing. We want to know more about that. And the different organizational analysis processes, the follow-ups that have been developed. If someone did something, what are the conclusions that they reached? That's very important for us because they will feed knowledge that we have to create. And we will also talk about perspectives on possible actions or lines of actions and major political events and what can we expect in 2026. That year for Guatemala is fairly loaded. The world environment and the continent environment apparently won't be light. This next year apparently will be complicated, and it's important to face it together. So that's a little bit of what we wanted to do for a follow-up. So we're talking about interviews, continue the discussion with you, having a more thorough conversation, detailed conversation. We want to discuss the follow-up methodology, strategy for the different methodologies that you have. And we also discuss the HIVE, which is the methodological debate, and this meetup for the North and the South, which is the space that we'll have to discuss important political events in the Americas. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Joel.
Thank you, Joel. So with this, we will be wrapping up our presentation. There's a QR code in your screen where you'll be able to find different resources and tools, the methodology, systematization, and you'll also be able to hear from all the panels that we had in the event. Great video quality, both in English and Spanish. So there's a series of resources that you can find there that can be useful to going deeper or disseminate these discussions to the spaces where they need to be taken. So thank you, everyone. We would love to know, I mean, there's time if you want to share something. I understand that Andres was raising his hand. I don't know if he wants to open up his mic so we can discuss this. Go ahead, Alex, while Andres is fixing his problem. You can unmute. Great. Yes, I'm here. There's an option that says that we can use the audio. I don't know if Andres is facing that problem, but good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invite. I am Alex Sierra from Colombia, and well, basically, we're highly motivated of knowing the systematization. We actually had a meetup afterwards for the Colombia chapter. It's important to mention that not everybody who participated in Guatemala knew each other. So we organized a meeting, just like a meetup, analyzing everything that we have discussed there, the different reactions to them, and obviously, not thinking about what is coming in Colombia. As you may know, one of the presidential candidates was actually murdered, and there's violence now with different terrorist attacks that are apparently highly linked to the political exercises of the right movements of the country. This is something that they do. They just terrorize communities. And generally speaking, we are talking about facing terrorist attacks from criminal organizations, but there's not a direct linkage to political actors that are fighting off for the Congress or the presidency for the next year. So I think that the need that we have, I think that we need to strengthen the linkage channels. We want to have an electoral observation process for the next year. We want to have the possibility of having nexus with teams that have been consolidated. And as a result of this exercise, we can have a direct contact between different communities and be able to improve our learning process and facing an openly fascist process that violates fundamental rights In Colombia, the challenge is precisely that. How is it that in the middle of a terror fear process that is happening in some sectors, we have to promote more and better democratical processes? Also wanted to say that we have two of the people who was actually in Guatemala. Levantu Mashanti is one of the presidential candidates among the 7 that will go to a consultation for the historical party. And I think that Ali doesn't have a lot of possibilities of actually being the president, but I'm sure that he can get to the Senate or the Congress in the next process. And on the other side, Ricardo Ruge, who wants to be in the Congress in the city of Bogota, which is a highly complex job and work, but it's a political participation of renewal processes, people under 35 years old. And we've been accompanying the activism closely together, but this is a civil organization, so of course we want to have this renewal of operations. Also, the work that Artemisas is doing with women from the Colombian Pacific state. So I think that for everybody, and I don't want to really say that this was very motivational, this meeting in Guatemala, but it actually was. We are working closely together, and hopefully soon enough we'll have teams invited in Guatemala and in Colombia for the 2026 elections. So I think that this systematization is very important, and I will also say that I think that we need to continue working strongly in this strategic exercise. I mean, the diagnosis is great, but we need to be strategic, positioning our agendas and to take back the political processes for the agendas for those of us who want to represent politically our communities, to have this capacity of taking this agenda and to elaborate it, to have a higher capacity for execution. I think that in the generation, this is the moment for which we have been preparing for decades. So we need to reactivate politically, but not only for the electoral process. So into distance, we actually see nostalgically and excitedly things like freedom from Eduardo Marsala, the delayed process for organizations for the freedoms of the leaders that were imprisoned. So I think that this has been very worthwhile because there's solidarities that go beyond likes or social networks. So without further, thank you for really opening this space to have this socialization. I think that what we are discussing here requires a lot of coordination. We were discussing with the team that the meeting in November will be very important, having some sort of agenda or being more clear of what are the important events for the political situation in different countries of the continent, and also having some sort of idea of what to expect for the next year. So I think that we will be coordinating with several of you to be able to share a little bit about their own situations in different countries. Yes, we're actually reading your text in the chat. I don't know if you're trying to text something different, but we can read you. We're sorry the miscoordination with Andrés. I don't know if we can get your message perhaps in a different opportunity. I don't know if anybody else wants to say something. Otherwise, we will be wrapping up for the day. But we wanted to thank you for your time and invite you back to this effort that is completely voluntary. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Elena. Hi, can you hear me okay?
¿Me escuchan bien?
I am in the highway in the car. Yes, we can hear you.
Perfecto.
Okay, I
Bueno,
just
yo nada más
wanted
para ver si
to
alguien más se
invite
motiva a
someone else
hablar.
to
Pero creo
talk
que aquí
about their
vamos
experience. There are several of
básicamente
us who are
estamos
actually
viendo los
watching
procesos que
all
están
the
ocurriendo en
processes that are
América
happening in
Latina,
Latin America.
cambios, algunos
Some positive
positivos y
changes and
algunos
some
negativos,
negative
¿no?
changes, what is
Lo que
happening
está
in
pasando en
Colombia,
Colombia,
in
lo que está pasando en
Bolivia,
Bolivia, lo que
in
está
El
pasando en
Salvador,
México,
elections
elecciones en
in
Honduras, como que viene
and
una serie
I
de
mean, there's a
procesos
series
y
of
una serie de
process of
movimientos
movements in opposite directions, apparently,
bastante, al
in
parecer,
Latin America.
en América Latina.
And
Y por
also,
otro
on
lado,
the
pues esta
other
relación
hand, this
norte-sur, ¿no?
relationship
La
with the
cuestión
North
que
and the South.
en este
I think that
momento
right now I can say that many of us here are concerned about this military rollout that we've seen, that it's a danger for the sovereignty and democracies of many countries in Latin America that is coming from the global north, from the US. This is a very specific moment or time in which we will see militarization processes in all of the countries in Latin America. We've always seen this type of intervention from the US. But right now, the US is also suffering internal problems. People living in the US are actually watching this process and living and suffering something that we've suffered historically. That makes me think about what can we do in order to face what is happening. I think that there are thousands of answers, but nothing specific. And I think that is very important for us to continue building on or defending not only electoral democratic processes, which I think is very important, of course, thinking that there are key actors and key decision makers that can really be serving the people and social movements, but also how to create these solid small spaces that are some sort of small bubbles. But if we reproduce 100 or 200 or 300 of such spaces in one single country, that can be the basis for us to be able to respond to the things that sometimes the state cannot respond to, and how can we defend democracies and sovereignty in facing exercises as what the US is doing. So I'm thinking about that, and hopefully someone else can be encouraged to raise their hand and comment something. Thank you. Thank you, Elena.
Gracias,
Erika,
Elena. Erika, si puedes,
go ahead.
adelante. ¿Me
Can you
escuchan?
hear me? Yes, we can.
Sí, se escucha.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, given the activity that happened in Panachapin, we were talking about democracy. Something that we discussed was authoritarianism and persecution that we were suffering. And I wanted to tell you that recently in the university center, we had a brief election. And in this case, as the organization, we created a platform in which we had two student representatives, and we were observing or watching that in the process that happened, we saw that authoritarianism and the thought that happened that this election process was not transparent. So it's very regrettable to see, especially in this type of topics. We can see that the student population is not really aware of what happens in these processes. They let themselves be influenced by certain teachers, there's manipulation. So it's very important for us to visualize or to make more visible these exercises to have a true democracy. That's my way in.
Thank you very much,
Gracias,
Erica.
Erika.
I
Por ahí vi
saw
que
also a
había
raised
levantado la mano
hand.
también Alex, pero no
Alex,
lo
you had your
alcancé a
hand
ver
up.
si
Did you want to
querías intervenir,
say something?
si no
Or
alguien
anyone
más
else?
por ahí. Bueno, pues también entendemos que
Well, we understand we're
por
all
diferencias
on
de
different
horarios
time
en
zones. We
estas
have
ocasiones, pues a veces es
different
complicado estas
responsibilities that
intervenciones, por eso es que
makes
todo
it
este espacio está
complicated
sistematizado,
for everyone to
pero bueno, pues estamos
participate or to get here. So
agradeciendo a
that's
especial a
why we
quienes
are
no
recording
hayan podido
this
participar,
program to be
pero
able to
pues
share it with those that couldn't make it.
no sé si alguien más quisiera compartir algo, si no, creo que también
So does anyone else have
agradecemos
anything
dar
to
por sentado
say
el
or
espacio.
contribute? If not, I would thank you all for being here. And
Ok, creo que podemos dar un segundito por ahí a ver
we can take
si
a
Alex habla. Me
few
estaba
moments
comentando que
to
le
hear
demos
from
2 o 3
Alex.
minutos
He's asked
para
for
poder
the word.
intervenir. Creo que
I
uno de
think
los
one of the
esfuerzos principales es
main
poder
challenges
colaborar
is to be
entre
able
los
to
diferentes
collaborate
aprendizajes,
across
¿verdad?
different
Hay algunas personas ya
sets of
que han
knowledge
mostrado mucho
or
interés, algunos
backgrounds.
estuvieron
A lot of
comentando
people
sobre
have
a poder
expressed their
colaborar
interest to
sobre
be
diferentes
involved in this.
metodologías.
People have
Creo que
talked
hay
about different
mucha fortaleza,
methodologies that we
ojalá
can
se
make
pueda
use
ir
of. And I think we have an opportunity
tejiendo pues
to
ciertas afinidades, ciertos trabajos
have
colectivos ahí,
more
¿verdad?
detailed
Obviamente lo
conversations
importante para nosotros es
and
mantener esto
identify
vivo
what we
de
want to do.
manera virtual,
But
aunque
ultimately, it's about
sea
keeping this
realmente
alive. And as Raul was saying, allowing this to
intermitente, pero
continue,
pues
even if it's intermittently, we're always
lógico a la vista
active.
entre nosotros mismos, ¿verdad?
Many
Porque a
times
veces nos
we
acostumbramos ver mucho
are,
el trabajo hacia
many times
afuera
we
y
get
no
used to
vemos lo
looking
que pasa a nuestro
outwards
alrededor y no vemos la experiencia que
and
estamos
we
viviendo
don't focus
en
on what's
esos
happening
momentos.
internally, what's
Entonces,
happening with
pues
ourselves.
de verdad espero
And
y
so
confío
I
en que
hope
se
and
puedan
I trust that we're going to
llevar
be
a
able to
cabo pues
carry
estas
out our
actividades que estoy
activities.
coordinando ahorita
I
con Alex,
think that
que no va a
Alex
lograr
is
llegar a
not
ningún
going to
lado
be
por
able to
conectarse e intervenir, me imagino que andará afuera,
get
pero
to
por mi parte que
he's not going to be able
eso es lo
to
que quería
participate
decir,
as he wanted to,
no podemos solamente
but
desvirtuar los
we can't
aspectos
just
políticos,
focus, I wanted
también
to say also,
Guatemala y
just
Colombia
on
son ejemplos
electoral
evidentes de que
politics.
hay
If we look at
administraciones
Guatemala
que no
or
son perfectas,
Colombia,
pero que
for
necesitan
instance, we understand that
poderse
these are not perfect
revitalizar.
governments, but they need to
Está teniendo un
uh,
problemita técnico,
revitalize
pero
themselves and
pues quería compartir eso,
activate a
Alex,
new
entonces lo comento acá
politics.
para que quede registrado.
So
Y
Alex
si
is
no hay nadie
trying to
más
connect.
queriendo
If there's no one else that
opinar,
has anything to
pues
share, I think we
damos por
can wrap up
sentados
for
este
today.
espacio con un gran agradecimiento y con
I'm
mucha emoción de poder
very happy.
tener
I'm
este
gladdened to
esfuerzo
be
en
able to
conjunto
have
para
this
mantenernos en
type of
contacto
gathering with all of
y que
you
de aquí pueda derivar
and to
esta
sustain
comunicación que
our
nos enriquece y
communication,
que nos una como
which
organizaciones de este continente.
enriches us and is fruitful for our continent. I already wrote this in the chat, and I know that we focus a lot on what we've done as we respond to the crises in the different countries. However, an important topic that I think we need to go further into is protection for human rights defenders. I think this is an issue that was expressed in the gathering, and we need to go into it more deeply. We've heard about what's happening in all the different countries, including in Guatemala. I'm talking about attacks against human rights defenders. And so this is an issue, this is a topic that requires more of our attention. We need to learn about how we can protect human rights defenders and how the communities in different regions can contribute to this thinking about the advocacy efforts that we create or we carry out in different regions and in different countries to protect these human rights defenders.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. And I completely agree with what you're saying.
Como parte del avance de los autoritarismos, también la persecución y
Authoritarianism relies
criminalización
on
de
this type of
organizaciones y de
suppression.
personas
And we've
se ha
seen
agravado
the
en varios
situation
países, ¿verdad? Yo creo que se
become
puede ir abriendo también
more explicit, it's more dire.
línea
And so it is an area
desde la
around which
línea.
we can
Muchas gracias
exchange
por el
information
aporte, Anish.
and work together.
No sé si alguien más quisiera
Is there
opinar,
anyone
podría
else
levantar la
that
mano y se le habilita el
would like to
micrófono
participate? Please raise your hand and we'll
automáticamente.
activate your microphone.
Y pues poco a poco esperamos ir
We're going
perfeccionando
to get better
lo que
at
queda de año.
facilitating these dynamics, these events, which help
Va
us
avanzando a
move forward with this
sobrellevar
and
estos
overcome the distances
mensajes.
between us.
Y pues bueno, yo creo que ahora sí, si no
Okay,
hay
then I
ninguna otra
think we don't have
intervención,
any
no hay
more
ninguna mano levantada.
people raising their hand. And so
Muchísimas
I
gracias.
thank you all. Thank you,
Gracias,
Gustavo.
Gustavo.
I send you
Saludos.
greetings.
Y pues
Please,
que tengan
everyone, have
feliz
a good
descanso
rest.
y esperamos poder tener
And we will
contacto pronto
continue to
para
be in
poder
touch.
seguir
We'll
coordinando,
continue
comunicándonos
to
y
interact with each
colaborando
other and
y
find
encontrando rutas juntas y
ways
juntos.
to move forward
Feliz
together.
noche.
Thank you.